I'm Gemma. Welcome to my channel. If you've not joined me before, then I'm a keen photographer and really enjoy something that I call wandering photography. Going out for a walk, seeing what I find and taking pictures as I go. But today we're doing something slightly different, and I wanted to just talk about some of the different techniques and tips and tools that you can use whilst you're using your camera to try and get those really good photos. So today we're going to look at aperture. There's a triangle that we use in photography to look at the three different elements of photography. So we have aperture, which we're looking at today, shutter speed and ISO. I'm going to do 3 different episodes, one on each one, and then we may just do another one summarising everything up and how to use it all together. So today we're just going to look at aperture. We're going to use 2 different experiments to show what that looks like. It would be great if you could grab your camera and join in with me, and we'll go through what those look like. So let's start off by just talking about what is aperture. Okay, so what is aperture? Aperture is all about the front of the lens. How much light is the lens going to let in here? So if you change your aperture, you will open or shrink the size of the hole on the lens, and that changes the amount of light that will come into the lens. So naturally, the bigger the hole, the more the light, the smaller the hole, the less the amount of light. That's as simple as it is. I'm saying it gets a lot more complicated. But to its main points, that's all it is. Bigger hole, more light, smaller hole, less light. Now where it gets really confusing, and it confuses me all the time, and I still get it wrong, even though I've been on fully manual for 5 years. Yeah, I still get it wrong. So let's get it right. The bigger the hole in the lens, the smaller the f-stop. So f-stop is how we measure the aperture. And I read something quite interesting a little while ago that kind of helped get it into my brain. The f-stop shows on most things as f/ and then a number. So that's like a fraction. And if you look at it like that, then you can tell that f/18 would be smaller than f/4. So rather than looking at it as 4 and 18, if you look at it as a fraction, then hopefully that will help stick it in your brain. At least it's helped stick it in my brain. So most cameras, you can change the f-stop. It may have a slash, it may not have a slash, depending on the camera that you've got. You can also change that on your phone as well. So if you wanted to, you can get into your settings on most cameras on phones and you can change the aperture in there. So f-stop is what you're looking for. The F signifies the aperture. So more light, less light, and the f-stop is what you want to look for. So f4 will let in more light than f/18. The other thing to consider with aperture and f-stops is that different lenses will let you use different amount of aperture. So certain lenses can open a certain amount and can shrink a certain amount, and so your camera will stop going in certain directions because it will be limited depending on which lens you're using as to how many f-stops you have. So that's something worth considering if you've got a couple of different lenses. Maybe try a couple of them, see if they've got different ranges or not, and that will show you on how far you can go on your f-stop range. Okay, so we've talked about aperture letting in more light or less light, and obviously that changes whether your image is dark or bright. But it also changes something else. It also changes your depth of field. The best way to do it and to understand is to give it a go, right? So we've got 2 experiments. I'm going to use some oranges because that's what I have handy, but use whatever you like. And we're going to have a play around. 1, to look at the brightness changes with aperture, and 2, to look at the depth of field. So let's give it a go. I wish I could juggle, show off to you. I can't. My dad can though, because he decided that he'd learned so that he could teach us, and then we weren't interested. So useless skill that my dad now has. Anyway, first experiment is going to be all about depth of field. So we're going to use several oranges. Let's give it a go. Right, our first experiment then, we're going to look at depth of field. So for this one, I'm going to use aperture priority on my camera. This means that I don't have to worry about any of the other settings, but I can play around with aperture to get exactly what I want. That means the brightness will all be sorted out for me because it will be changing my shutter speed and my ISO for the images. So on my camera, I have a dial. You may have a different method than that, and the light's shining on it, so that makes it hard to see. Because it's pointing exactly at the A, which is what I want, so I'm just going to put it to aperture priority. So as you can see, my camera is set up, and as I change the dial, which will change my aperture, which as you can see is f4, so as I said before, an f-stop is for aperture. My camera, I quite like it, it's got all three settings of the triangle straight in front of you there when you're playing around with it. So because it's in aperture priority, as I change that aperture, you'll see that the shutter speed on the left hand side is changing of its own accord because the light sensor is picking it up. If it needed to, the ISO would change too, but it's decided to stick to 400. So really simple setup, 3 oranges, all in a line, and this is going to help us to see how our aperture is changing the image. So what I want to do is I want to get all 3 oranges in the frame of my camera, and I want to play around with my aperture. So I'm going to start with the lowest aperture I've got, which is f3.8, and I'm going to take a picture there. So hopefully you can see from that the first orange is right in focus, and you can see that the last 2 oranges are blurry. Now obviously I'm in quite a confined area here, I'm just doing it on my desk space. If you do this with even further distance between the items, you get even more out of focus and blurry backgrounds. So now that we've taken that image, I'm going to up my f-stop. So we started at 3.8. I'm going to go up to f5 and see what that looks like. So I can see there that the middle orange is starting to come into focus. So I'm going to up the f-stop again. Let's go with a 7.1. And slowly we're starting to see more and more of the background is coming into focus. So if I go up to let's go all the way up to f14, why not? You see it's taking longer to take the photo. In fact, that's all blurry, and that's because I have not used a tripod, because the shutter speed is now getting to about 1/2, so that means that my camera is automatically making my shutter speed longer. So if I'm going to try and do it handheld and see how we get on. Just got to keep myself steady. Yeah, so we're getting much more in focus now, so let's go all the way up to f25. So the front orange and the middle orange in focus, and the back one's just starting to come into focus now as well. So yes, there's a lesson for you. Use a tripod when you're doing this one. Don't just start doing it all handheld like I have. So f25 is the highest setting that my camera will go to, so that's how I can play around with it. As I said before, this is quite a confined environment. Try doing something maybe in the garden or out in the park if you've got lampposts. Try playing around with that aperture and seeing what you can get. Okay, for the third, we're only doing 2, why would there be a third?
For the second experiment, we are going to look at the light levels and how Aperture changes your light levels. So for this, I'm going to use my oranges again, just to make up a little scene, and we're going to have a look at the brightness. So don't get too scared, we are going to use manual, but I'll give you a little trick to try and help us make it work properly. Okay, so I've used my oranges to put in a pile because I was trying to make something slightly artistic, and I'm not sure it is. What else have I got that I could... It doesn't really matter what you're taking a photo of. I could pretend that it's been painted. No, that's stupid. Anyway, let's go on with it. Stop faffing around. Okay, so my camera's still in Aperture Priority, and I'm going to use this to set up my manual mode. So what I want to do, I know that f2.5 is my highest, I've got f3.8 is my lowest, so I'm going to go somewhere in the middle. And I know I've just looked at the numbers and I can't work out where the middle is. Let's go f13. And I'm just going to take note that my shutter speed is 1/3 or 4th, depending on what it feels like. So we'll go with 1/4, and my ISO is 400. Now this is going to be useful because in manual we're going to have to set all of our settings, but really what we're looking at is aperture. So at the moment the camera thinks that the brightness levels are just right at 1/4, f13 and ISO 400. So I am going to switch to M for manual. And I'm just going to switch it out of live mode so that we can see the settings properly. So my shutter speed was at 1/4, so I'm going to go for that. My ISO is at 400 already, and my aperture is at f13. So we've got our oranges set up, we've got our settings all in line, and we're going to take an image. And that, although I appear to have a very dirty desktop, gives us our image at a medium light level. What I'm going to do then is change my aperture, if it wants to focus. So for my camera, when it's in manual, this button changes the shutter speed. Obviously it's going to depend on your camera. To change to aperture, I have to change the aperture, I have to hold down this button here, the plus and minus button, and then move the dial. And that will change my aperture. So I'm going to go all the way to its widest, f3.5. And then I'm going to take another picture. So the only thing we've changed is the aperture. The ISO is the same, the shutter speed is the same. All we've got different is that aperture. And as you can see, the picture is very white. And that's showing you the brightness levels have gone up massively. So the other thing we can do is go in the other direction. So I'm going to go all the way up to f22. Everything else still the same. And take a picture. And that image, although it may be hard for you to see here, I'll show you the actual image, is much darker than the previous ones we've taken. So those three, and you can play around, see how much of a difference it makes between each f-stop. That shows you just how much the light changes depending on how wide and how narrow your aperture is. So the thing to think about with everything that we do with cameras is that it's all based on the eye. So you may notice when you see somebody in a darker environment that their pupils are a different size than when they're in a brighter environment, and that is exactly what Aperture is doing. So hopefully those two experiments that we've just done have really helped you to understand what we're doing, and hopefully will help you when you're out in the field getting pictures to change your aperture and get the exact image that you want from that. I'm hoping that whilst I've been talking you've noticed that I've got a t-shirt on that's got a crop side on, but it gets even better. Let's see if you can see it.
It might be back to front for you guys, but it says O crop, and I just thought it was hilarious, so little present for myself. Anyway, I hope this session has been really useful for you and you've helped to understand Aperture, how to use it on your camera or on your phone to get those pictures with the exact depth of field you want and the right level of brightness. If you have enjoyed, then please do give the video a thumbs up, and I'd love to hear how you get on with those experiments down below. Let me know, are you using oranges or are you using something else that's a bit more fun? And hopefully I'll see you again soon. Thanks, bye!